Okay, I believe we're ready to get started. I apologize for the delay. Before we get started, I do want to touch on again our Mix It Up activity that's going on October 29th. I'm excited to announce that we do have a promotional video for that event on our homepage of our website. And I believe it's a teaser to get everyone excited about our Mix It Up event, which will be wrapped around tolerance. And on that day, our students and our teachers, administrators, even board members will all be having lunch with someone that they normally probably wouldn't, or someone that they don't know, in an effort to reach out to other people and learn about their differences, and so we all can learn to understand each other. So that is on October 29th. Secretary, are we ready to call the roll? Thank you.
Are we going to sit? Okay. Mr. Anderson?
Here.
Mr. Heisel?
Here.
Mr. Teray?
Here.
Secretary's here. President Hall?
Here. Please stand.
Oh, did I say not Mr. Brown? I'm sorry. Mr. Brown.
Here.
Apologize.
And Mr. Stockton is absent.
Yes.
Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, we have not received any public comment requests. Is that correct, Mrs. Berta? Ms. Berta? Okay. Okay, moving right into our public hearing for our budget presentation.
Okay, so he wants us to go down.
Can I have a motion to open the public hearing for the 2013-14 budget presentation?
Move.
Moved by Mr. Heisel,
Second.
second by Mr. Teray. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, we are officially in our public hearing. Do we have anyone present that would like to make comments in regards to our 2013-14 budget? Okay, I guess we don't. I gotta make a motion to close it. Motion to close it. Oh, okay, okay. All right, Mr. Bruce, you ready?
Let's go. You're doing a slideshow, right? Yeah.
That was a motion for what's the budget?
Okay, is this on? Good evening. My name is Robert Groos. I'm the Assistant Superintendent for Business. and tonight I'm going to give you a brief presentation of our FY14 legal budget. In August, we passed the tentative budget, and that's been on display for over 30 days, and then also posted on the district website. And this, at the public hearing, is for the public to make any comments regarding our budget, and then also to just briefly go over some of the main points of the budget. Overall, the process works in that each September, school districts need to pass their legal budget before September 30th. And the budget is what legally authorizes the district to collect and expend funds. And each August, on August 20th, we passed our tentative budget, and that's been on display for 36 days. Tonight we could take any comments regarding the budget, and the budget has been reviewed and discussed in detail with the board at various meetings throughout the months of August and September. Also, we've had our budget projections available since February 2013, which have been pretty consistent with what we see tonight in the legal budget. The legal budget process is set up by the state of Illinois to be a very accountable and accurate process in that, we take line by line, we put the budget together over a 5-month period. It starts in mid to late April, and then we wrap up kind of the final numbers in late August. Our budget this year is a $61.5 million operating budget, and that's made up of several thousand line items. We take all these line items and basically categorize them into 71 cost centers. And so the way that's split up is about 30% of the budget is for primarily building and department budgets, and then the other 70% of the budget is basically just salaries and benefits for all our employees. And then we categorize all those expenses into about 71 different categories, which we'll go through tonight. The FY13 expenditure budget, when you look at our actuals versus what we budgeted, was 99.7% accurate. In FY12, we were 99.1% accurate, and back in FY11, we were 98.4% accurate. So we have a history of showing that the numbers that we budget for the fiscal year, we always end up spending, and all those amounts is we spent slightly less than what was budgeted. We never went over. So basically, our budgets are very accurate. The district is always striving to be as lean and as efficient as possible. And throughout the year, there's various reports that are reported to the board periodically. We have 5-year forecasts that we update periodically. We have quarterly actual to budget expenditure reports that are presented. And then also the district's finances are audited annually by independent and state financial auditors. So, every fiscal year, all these numbers are double-checked by outside auditors, and then that's reported to the board also. For fiscal year 2013, you can see that we began the year with a total fund balance of about $15 million. Total revenue was $56.8 million, and we had total expenses of $59.4 million. So the total deficit for the year was about $2.6 million. And so the ending fund balance, when you subtract the deficit from the beginning fund balance, was about $12.5 million. Some highlights for the year was that the state of Illinois actually got caught up in their state payments that they've been behind for several years now, and they actually made a 5th quarterly payment. So typically we get 4 quarterly payments from the state for the different categorical grants, and this year they actually made a 5th payment, so that was an extra $1.3 million for fiscal year 2013. Also, we had lower than expected health claims. So the premiums that we collect in terms of health insurance versus the amount of dollars that were paid out in actual claims, the claims were lower this year, so we ran a surplus in the health fund. And then also we received our $23.6 million construction grant back in October of 2012. One concern of the FY13 budget was that our special education tuition costs increased by about $600,000. And basically that was due to several new high-need students that moved into the district. And we'll cover more of that later on in the presentation. For the fiscal year 2014 legal budget, our fund balance starts off where we left off at the end of 13, so we have about $12.5 million in the fund balance. Total revenues are projected to be $58.5 million, with total expenditures projected to be $61.5 million. So we have a total deficit of about $3 million. So when you subtract that deficit from the beginning fund balance, you can see the ending fund balance will be about $9.5 million, which represents about 15% of our annual expenditures. The target typically that the board has wanted to stay at is about 25%. So 15% is below that target amount. This deficit of $3 million is an increase over FY13's deficit of about $400,000. So the next slide, basically, this shows the nature of how annual budgets work. Throughout each year, there's always items that improve the budget and things that make the budget more of a deficit. So, for example, we had our property taxes and our general state aid revenue go up. So that's the two large increases to start the year off. But then at the same time, other state funding goes down because if you remember last year we had 5 state payments, and this year we'll only get the regular 4 state payments. So that's going to be a decrease in that area. Also, we had cuts to federal funds due to the sequestration. So our Title I and our IDEA funds were cut back. So that's an offset there. Then we have some other slight increases where we have our E-rate funds are going up. We have some other slight savings in the budget. Also, we have some energy savings and other savings in our maintenance budget due to the fact that we could transfer some of our capital projects over to possibly the CDB funds and do those capital projects with our grant funds instead of our operating funds. And then you can see towards the end all these other increases that eat away at our revenue increases. So, for example, the rates for our busing, the bus rates go up per the contract. People that are on retirement contracts receive raises. Our Acme union received their raises. Our workers' comp insurance rates increased. Like I said, special ed tuition increased. Health benefit rates increased once again. And then also built in is the year 1 tech plan, which we'll talk about later. But essentially that's a one-time expenditure to get our computer labs and technology upgraded for the online testing that's coming with the state next year. So you can see basically what happens is the total net impact of all this is actually a decrease of $400,000 in terms of our deficit. So we had some increases, but we had some increases in revenue and some savings, but then the offsetting increases in costs wipe out those increases in revenue, and then the deficit grows by $400,000. Also, like we looked at last year, keeping track of all the state funding cuts that we started receiving back in fiscal year 2009, and a lot of these cuts have been permanent since then, and some of them increasing over the years. Essentially, the main items are that the foundation level, which is the key figure that's used to calculate how much funding each school district receives from the state, that dollar amount has been frozen in time for 5 consecutive years, so there's no increases coming through that. Also, the general state aid that we receive from the state, Illinois doesn't have enough funds to pay all of those funds out to all the school districts, so what they do is they prorate the amount, and essentially what that is, for example, for this year, they cut it back by 11%, so they only give you 89% of the calculation of money that you're supposed to get. So that equates to over $1 million cut right there. Also, the other large cut is with regular transportation. For several years now, we haven't been receiving our full 80% reimbursement, and that costs the district about $600,000 a year. Also, these are all carryovers from previous years. These other grants that the district used to receive on an annual basis, all these grants have been cut and eliminated down to zero, essentially. So if you look at all the state cuts impacting this year's budget is about $4.6 million. So if you consider that we had a $3 million deficit, if we didn't have all these state cuts in place, we'd actually be running about a $1.6 million surplus. The bad news with this is that, as we all know, the state of Illinois is not in very good financial condition, so the outlook of these types of cuts going away anytime soon is not very good. So in terms of revenue, what that translates to is that our school district, just like many other school districts, relies very heavily on property taxes. So you can see that property taxes makes up about 61% of our operating revenue. Another 15% comes from general state aid, and then another 12% comes from other state grants. We get 8% from federal grants, and then 2% from corporate property taxes, and then finally another 2% from other categories, which would include things like school fees and other various miscellaneous grants. So, I mean, essentially on a cash flow basis, without property taxes coming into the district, the district would not be able to operate for more than just a few months, and we would essentially run out of our fund balance. Because you're talking about the money that comes in it's about $36 million of operating funds and about $10.5 million of debt service funds that the property tax levy brings in each year. So that's how our revenue is broken down. Here is our expenditures and how this is broken down into the various funds. So first you have on the top section are the non-salary and benefits. So these are supplies, services, contracts, utilities. Basically what's in here is first you have the education fund, which makes up about 19% of the budget, and then the operations and maintenance fund, which is basically custodial and maintenance and operating our buildings. That makes up about 5% of our budget, and then transportation makes up the other 7%. So non-personnel costs, like we said before, is about 30% of the budget, and then the other 70% is all salaries and benefits. So first what I'll do is I'll show you the detail behind the education fund. So the $11.5 million, which makes up the 19%, it's broken down into these categories. These are the cost centers that we track our expenses through for Ed Fund. And then on the next few slides, what I'll do is I'll take you through some of the bigger cost centers. For example, special education of about $4.6 million, food service, curriculum, and tech department. So you can see those are all over $1 million each, and certainly our largest cost centers. So for example, the first cost center, special education. So they spend about $4.6 million a year, and the vast majority of that, actually about $4.1 million, is on private facility tuition. So these are students that have special needs, they have high needs that we can't take care of, and they are sent to other private facilities where they have the resources to take care of these students, and then our district pays tuition to those private facilities. So for example, some of the different services include things like autism, deaf and vision, behavioral, physical disorders, different vocational education, emotional disorders. And so you can see the total on here for this year's budget. We have about 119 students in this category. And you can see that the average cost for all 119 students, the average cost of sending somebody out is about $34,500 per student. It ranges anywhere from, I think the highest on here is, you can see that the top facility is actually $88,000 a year. That's just for one student. And then there's different costs depending on how many services these students need, but essentially this is a huge cost in our operating budget that we need to take steps to make sure that we're fully controlling and understanding why each of these students need these different services and make sure that we're tracking this very closely. Also included in there as well as you see on one line down is nursing and physical therapy services, and that's another large cost of about $350,000. So essentially the entire special ed department gets a little over $100,000 to run their entire department district-wide all year long, and the other $4.4 million all just goes to this private facility tuition. Food service is also another large cost center, but of course, we're serving about 763,000 meals a year to our students, and we do that very efficiently. Our overall cost is about $1.83 per meal, and 70% of the lunches and 84% of the breakfast meals are actually free meals through the federal nutrition program. So the way that works is when we serve those meals, we get reimbursed by the federal government for those meals, and it's kind of an offset in terms of the revenue that comes in pays for the cost of this going out. But either way, it is a significant operation in our district, and you can see, you know, the different categories where we spend our funds to produce these lunches each day. The curriculum budget is also a large budget, and it's $1.1 million for this fiscal year. And essentially, this is just a long list. This doesn't even encompass everything, but this is a listing of the different programs and initiatives and different areas that we spend the money in terms of our curriculum program. And then finally, technology is also a large budget, our technology department. The budget this year is $1.4 million. Now, their usual annual operating budget is about $900,000 a year, but this year it's about $600,000 more than usual because they're implementing the new computer labs and the infrastructure to get us ready for the state online testing that starts next school year. And then also this year we're going to run some pilot programs and do some map testing in terms of getting ready for next school year. So this money is put into the budget to buy all that needed infrastructure to get that in place. And then the regular operating budget is just basically the department running all of our other technology throughout the district. That just keeps all of our systems and our programs that we use across the district up and running. So through all that, we covered the first line item, $11.5 million, about 19% of the budget. And then the next two slides briefly will be the operations and maintenance fund and transportation fund. So first, O&M, their budget is about $2.8 million. And essentially what that is it's all the costs associated with maintaining all of our buildings and grounds. So we have over 1 million square feet of building space and about 240 acres of grounds and fields that we maintain and update throughout the year. And then also included in that $2.8 million is our utility bills, so for electric and natural gas. And those costs are about $1.2 million a year. So almost half the budget is just for utilities alone. Broken down is $300,000 for natural gas, $800,000 for electricity, and about $60,000 for water bills. And then other than that, the balance of the funds are used to, you know, clean and maintain and update all these facilities across the district. And then transportation is a significant portion of our budget. We spend about $4.3 million a year on transportation. What that includes is we transport about 4,600 students a year, and the total miles that we record and report to the state is about 1.2 million miles per year of transportation. So this includes all categories, including regular and special education transportation. And the district's current route package has been kind of tweaked and updated throughout the years, and it is at a pretty efficient setup right now in terms of the routes that we use, and also the contract that we have in place is a very good pricing contract in terms of when we entered into the new contract back in FY12, we were saving about $1 million a year compared to the previous contract. So we're right now in year 3 of that contract, and it's a 3-year contract. So next year, we will be looking at renewing our contract or going out to bid to get a new contract for transportation. So a risk there is that since, you know, the pricing is so good on this contract, prices may go up in terms of fuel prices are higher since when we locked this in 3 years ago, and also hopefully we can get, you know, the same good pricing that we had this time around, but if not, you know, costs will go up on our transportation fund. So we covered the top 30%, and then the 70%, which is salaries and benefits, essentially is 90% of that cost is our roster of employees. So we have about 676 employees. You can see here it's broken down. Obviously, a little over 50% are teachers, and then we have administrators, administrative support, ACME listed up there. Those are our teacher aides, and then our specialists, operations and maintenance, food service, and security. So you can just see the different breakdown in terms of FTE and then cost to the total percentage of the budget. So you see the total here is about $38 million, and then the other 10% of the salaries and benefits comes in these categories. So these categories are kind of everything else in terms of these are your substitute teachers, all of your athletic extra duty stipends, all of your bus duty, noon duty, all those lunch supervision duty, and then different things related to TRS retirement cost and overtime and just all these different categories that we track and budget for to make sure that we're accounting for every dollar in the budget. So you can see on the very bottom, when you add the two together, it's about $42 million of salaries and benefits. So once you cover everything up above, then that's the total. That's $61.5 million, and that's pretty much the detail behind the entire expenditure budget. Those are the operating funds. Then we have 3 non-operating funds. So these are separate from the operating budget because these are just kind of one-time revenue coming in and one-time expenditures going out. And essentially what it is you have your debt service fund. So that's the fund where we collect tax money to pay off debt and bonds from past years. We have our capital projects fund, which is where when you raise money, either through referendums or selling debt, or say through a capital construction grant, when you do those capital projects, you transfer the money into the capital projects fund and spend it out of that fund. And then there's the fire prevention and safety fund, which is basically for life safety issues. And you could use those funds to address anything that's identified as a life safety issue by the state. And then this is just a historical look at our budget going back to 2006. So you can see in 06 and 07 we had our annual surpluses of about $758,000 and then $2.5 million. You can see pretty healthy fund balances back in those 2 years. Then starting in 2008, 2009, our annual operating deficit became very large. We had a $4 million operating deficit in 08. It actually got as high as $6.7 million in 09. And then in 2010, it was at about $5.6 million. So you can see that 2009, our fund balances actually got as low as $4.5 million. And then at the end of fiscal year 2010, the district made significant cuts in staffing and programs, and then at the same time also sold some working cash bonds to replenish the fund balances that had been lost in past years. And then then 2011, we were in very good financial condition in terms of we had a surplus and we had a healthy fund balance. And then since 2011, the deficit has just kind of been creeping up a little bit higher each year due to essentially expenses going up by a little bit more than revenue goes up each year. So that gap just gets a little bit wider, and then the fund balance just slowly starts to drop down, as you can see depicted in the graph there. On the bottom, I add in then, on top of our regular operating funds, add in our capital development board grant funds for a total fund balance. And right now we have our capital development board funds. 21 million of those funds is being held in operating funds, so that we have the flexibility to use those for emergency purposes. And then in the case of when it's time to do some of the capital projects that have been identified, we could transfer those funds out of operating into the capital projects fund. So overall, in terms of financial future, the key is to strategically manage our financial uncertainty. In terms of uncertainty, we're talking about current state education funding cuts likely to be sustained, like we talked about. State pension reform, which is likely to happen soon and may significantly increase our district costs. Healthcare reform law, which is going to start taking an effect pretty much this year and next year in full force, and that's going to be increasing our district cost. Then also just other items like unfunded mandates. There's always new unfunded mandates every single year that come up. We have our pending negotiations that are going on, and then also a significant need to update, renovate, and replace current buildings. And then also, obviously, the operating budget is currently in a deficit, so we know that this diminishes our fund balances each year. So that's the uncertainty and the threats that we're facing. So the recommendations for moving forward after tonight would be to minimize or avoid all non-mandated cost increases. So that would include things like raises, new staff, new programs. Also mitigate your risk and uncertainty by maintaining sufficient fund balances. And then reduce some non-instructional costs. Look into the budget to see if there's anything available to reduce so that we can help pay for direct classroom expenses. And then finally to finalize our long-term district facility plan so that we can identify funding sources for all those projects that we need to do. So that's all I have, and now it's open for any questions. Otherwise, that's all I have for tonight. Sure. Yeah, the E-Funds is essentially, it's a federal program that pays for any type of electronic communications. So what that breaks down to is it's basically like our phone bills and our internet bills. And this year, the way it worked was we would pay our Comcast bill for all of our internet connections. We would pay the full bill and then get reimbursed after the fact. We would turn in all the bills and they reimburse us about 80% of the cost. And essentially what we're going to do for next year is just changing. It's the same concept, but we're just going to get the discount directly applied to the bill. So we kind of get the discount up front. So that way, instead of the bill being whatever the amount is per month, it will only be 20% of that amount. But then at the end of the year, we won't get that rebate check coming in. So that was it's just a kind of a transfer between revenue and expense. Okay, thank you. All right, thank you.
Okay, I want to clarify there are no further comments or questions in regards to the 2013-14 budget. Our budget presentation is done annually, and we do put this information out to our public, and the information is readily available on our website. And we always welcome public comment in regards to our budget and public input. So thanks to you that are here, and we will move forward. Can I have a motion to come out of the public hearing for the 2013-14 budget?
So move.
Moved by Mr. Brown,
Second.
second by Mr. Anderson. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, we are out of our public hearing. Can I get an amendment, a motion to amend the agenda to include a closed session after the action reports?
I move that
To amend the agenda to include a closed session.
I move
after-
that we amend the agenda to include a closed session after the action reports.
Moved by Mr. Brown.
Second.
Second by Mr. Anderson. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, thank you. The agenda is amended. Okay, administrative updates. Mr. Bruce.
Okay, thank you. The first update is kind of a repeat of our budget presentation. This is our fourth quarter budget report for FY13. And essentially, you'll see on page 19 and 20 of Board Book, we have our final results have come in. Expenditure budget was 99.7% accurate. We spent 0.3% less than budgeted. And then our FY12 revenue budget was also came in very close to budget, but it was slightly higher than budgeted just due to that extra state payment that we received that I talked about. And then as of today, the state of Illinois has caught up with their categorical payments to the district, so there's no overdue payments due to the district as of today.
Bob, is the state caught up in their payments to us?
Yes, they're caught up, and then we're planning for them to be on schedule now in terms of receiving our 4 FY14 payments during FY14.
The fifth payment was the final.
The fifth payment was in 13 we received an extra a late payment from 12 came into 13, and then we actually received all 4 of our 13 payments. So it was 4 13s and then 1 12.
Have you heard any talks of, you said you assume that we should be getting them regularly now. Have you heard any talks of possibilities of not?
I haven't heard anything that they think that it might slide where they're going to fall behind again. But at the state level, we monitor that monthly because things change so fast. But essentially, they're saying that they expect that we should receive our 4 payments. And then also with our district, we're on a accrual base of accounting. So what that means is any payments that come in during July and August, 60 days after the fiscal year, we can accrue back to our fiscal year. So even if they did slide back a month or even 2 months in terms of being late, that would still get counted into this year's budget. So I'm pretty confident that we'll get our 4 payments for FY14.
Okay, thank you.
I think you're a little bit more confident than I am. I'm glad you're the business manager. Just want to make a note that we, in fact, kind of gave up our contingency fund, so we do not have any contingency factored into our budget, and that was like $300,000. So we'll just keep our hands together as a prayer that the state do what they are responsible to do.
Any final questions? Comments? Thank you, Mr. Bruce. Can I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Moved.
Moved by Mr. Heisel.
Second.
Second by Mr. Teray. Any questions, comments? Edison, Dr. Edison, can you just clarify the purpose of this report for everyone?
Sure, Dr. Hall. The last several years, we have been required by the state to list the administrative salaries of compensation for all administrators within the school district. A couple of years ago, they added an amendment to this statute that requires that all certified staff, so including both administrators and teachers, salaries are listed and posted on the internet. That went into effect last year. And so this will be the second year that we would be listing all certified staff. So it's required by law, and we are want to be in compliance with the law.
Okay, thank you. Secretary, please call the roll. I'm sorry, I think that's what we can do as a group vote for consent agenda. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? No nays. The motion carries. Okay, our action reports. Mr. Bruce, it's all on you.
Okay, first action report is to adopt the FY14 budget resolution. Essentially, beginning on page 40 on board book, and the legal budget that was presented tonight in terms of total revenues and expenses as presented, and then the state budget form is attached on board book here, and the recommendation is to adopt the FY14 legal budget.
Can I have a motion to adopt the FY14 legal budget?
Moved.
Moved by Mr. Heisel,
Second.
second by Mr. Anderson. Any questions or comments? Okay, Secretary, please call the roll.
Mr. Anderson?
Aye.
Mr. Brown?
Aye.
Mr. Heisel?
Aye.
Mr. Stockton? She's not here. Mr. Teray?
Aye.
And Secretaries, aye. Dr. Hall?
Aye. Okay, motion carries. The heart that smiles.
Okay, our second action item is to renew our agreement with the dentist firm, The Heart That Smiles. They provide the dental services that for students that at certain grade levels they need to have some minimum dental checkups and cleanings done. And throughout last school year, The Heart That Smiles provided these services across the district at different buildings. And we had a one-year agreement with them, and this agreement is to extend our agreement with them. And they have attached as the contract, the independent contractor agreement, the certificate of insurance, and all the paperwork that's required with that. And I believe this is for a two-year term. Yes, I didn't put that in. So it would be for this school year and next school year. So the recommendation is to approve the independent contractor agreement with The Heart That Smiles. We did have good service with them this past school year. They did a good job. And we, throughout the year, we were getting better and better use of the services once the communication of the availability of the services was sent out to parents.
What was the name of it?
I concur, Mr. Bruce. I heard very good feedback about this program, and I was elated to see them at the registration this year, getting a heads up on making the parents aware of the program. So I think that was a very good effort made. Any questions or comments?
I concur. I've heard nothing but good things about this program.
Secretary, please call the roll.
Mr. Teray?
Aye.
Mr. Heisel?
Aye.
Mr. Brown?
Aye.
Mr. Anderson?
Aye.
Secretaries, aye. Dr. Hall?
Aye. Just reiterating that that program is of no cost to the district.
Correct.
That is correct. We need to find more programs like that.
Yes.
That's a no-brainer.
Okay, next we have our contract extension with the homeless student routes for Illinois Central. Mr. Bruce.
Thank you.
I'm sorry. Can I have a
Oh.
motion to approve the contract extension for Illinois Central with homeless student routes?
Moved.
Moved by Mr. Heisel,
Second.
second by Mr. Brown. Mr. Bruce.
The district has contracted our homeless student routes with Illinois Central over the last 3 school years, and we're looking to renew our agreement with Illinois Central for a 4th year. We would essentially just extend the contract that we had in place, extend it by 1 year. We negotiated a renewal rate with them, and they agreed to come down to CPI, which is 1.7%. So the renewal rate would be 1.7%, and this would equate to a $514 increase, because last year we spent about $30,000 on these services. So if the rates went up by about that amount, we'd be looking at about a $500 increase. The number of students that use these services fluctuates from year to year depending on what homeless students are moving in and out of the district, but it's important to have a secure and reliable service in place that has the proper insurance, the proper training, safe, reliable transportation to provide these students. And they've done a really good job the last 3 years working with our homeless liaison and getting the students routed very efficiently and quickly. So for the 1.7% increase, we are recommending that we approve a 1-year extension with Illinois Central for these routes.
Any questions or comments? I know Mr. Elrod is not here, but Bob or John, anybody that can answer this question, have we had any issues concerning this? Because I know before we had, issues clarifying, with the McKenty-Vento law as far as what the extent of our responsibility is with transportation. Have we had any issues?
We haven't had issues. A big part of that reason is we have a part-time homeless liaison that works for the district, and that individual meets individually with each of these homeless students and goes through the different requirements to make sure that they meet those requirements to be considered homeless. And then in terms of transportation, we'll communicate directly with Illinois Central to get those routes set up. And then what we do is we keep track of these routes, and we send, 50% of the bill will be sent to that student's home district where they came from. So then we get reimbursed by that district 50% of the cost. And then we keep close tabs on that in terms of who is paid. A lot of the students are coming out of Chicago, so it's harder to get the money out of the Chicago school district. But they do make payments. It's usually just about a year late. We just have to send them invoices for about a year, and then we finally get the money back.
That's that great state of Chicago, huh?
Yes.
The state.
Call Ram. I'm sure he'll give you what you want.
What was that? Okay. Okay, Secretary, please call the roll.
Mr. Teray.
Aye.
Mr. Heisel.
Aye.
Mr. Brown.
Aye.
Mr. Anderson.
Aye.
Secretary's aye. Dr. Hall.
Aye. Okay, Illinois Central contract extension for our special ed routes. Can I have a motion to approve this contract?
Moved.
Moved by Mr. Heisel,
Second.
second by Mr. Brown. Mr. Bruce.
Okay, this is a similar contract, but these routes are for special ed students that are placed out at private facilities. So instead of transporting them to one of our school buildings here, they are routed to the private facility that they go to. And we spend about $80,000 a year on these routes, and the 1-year extension rate is proposed at 1.7% for CPI. And also keep in mind that the special ed routes are still reimbursed by the state by 80%. So even though regular education state funding has been cut back to about 55%, we still do receive our full 80% reimbursement on all our special ed costs. So we'll get about 80% of that $80,000 back. With a 1.7% increase, that's going to equate to about a $1,400 increase year over year. So with this increase rate of 1.7%, we are recommending to approve the one-year extension with Illinois Central for the special ed private facility routes.
Thank you. Secretary, please call the roll.
Do we have any questions?
I'm sorry, any questions or comments?
I just had one, Bob. You mentioned earlier in your presentation we need to monitor and curtail the spending. So how do we manage that? And it's always been my understanding that we, it's kind of something we must do. But for example, that specific line item that said somebody is receiving room and board, I'm not questioning it per se, but room and board and one student, 88,000, without being, overbearing on that particular person. How do you decide, oh, that may be exorbitant spending or not?
Well, what we're going to do is we'll work closely with our Director of Special Education and review each of these students' IEPs and their needs and make sure that they're placed at the appropriate facility. There's also, we've been discussing how we might be able to bring some of these students back into the district, which would require adding staff. But if you do the cost analysis on it, it could be cheaper to hire a few staff members and bring them back in-house than to pay the high tuition cost. And then also just to just really have a good grasp on exactly who all these students are. If it goes from 119 up to 120, like we need to know about that. We just can't be surprised and all of a sudden say, oh, we have 10 extra kids and that just happened over the last few months and we didn't know about it. So we'll be watching it as close as possible and just kind of at a very itemized level, just watching the costs on each of these students. And then also too, that's important because a lot of this tuition is claimable for reimbursement the following year from the state. So we also keep close track of what we're spending our money on and make sure that we're claiming all that properly, because it's a very complicated process in terms of how you code each of the bills and how you submit all that to the state. And you could very easily miss just a couple of students here and there, and that could cost the district several $1,000s. So we have a system in place that basically tracks all these expenses, and then they all get claimed at the end of the year, and then we get that money back in the following budget as reimbursement revenue.
Thanks, Bob.
Any further questions or comments?
I have a question. Who makes, where can I find the criteria and stuff to find out what qualifies this child to have this service?
That would be, I would refer you to our Director of Special Education to kind of ask those questions. She could definitely better answer that than I could. But it depends on what their disability is or what their issue is. For example, if the student is identified through the process that they use to say, okay, this individual has autism, then then they're eligible to receive certain services to help with that disability. And then there's certain private facilities that they use to send those students to. But I think our Director of Special Ed could certainly discuss that in more detail and give you better information in terms of how that process works.
I can add a little bit. Each student who has an IEP is screened, and through several of the special ed professionals, and as Mr. Gruss said, sometimes some outside resources. And together they put together a plan for that particular child based upon what those needs are. The screening is all sorts of diagnostic testing. If it's a physical issue, their physical tests and so forth. And they come up with a rationale for what's the best placement for this child. And then they decide if there's an outsourced facility, if we don't have it in-house that we could accommodate, then we have to outsource them from outside. Then they look at the best area, the best facility that matches that child's needs. That's basically how it's done.
All right, who's the special ed coordinator? What's his or her name?
Dr. Arisola?
Yeah. Dr. Arisola.
I would also like to say this to the board or to the public. I'll give you 3 easy examples, and we have had all 3 in the past. Sometimes we've actually had students who are blind, whether that's partially blind or totally blind. We've had students who have been deaf, and we have had students that have severe emotional or behavior disorders to the point that the disorder dictates a certain type of service. Otherwise, it would actually be unsafe if you don't have the proper services for certain students to be around a general population without the additional support that they would need in order to stay in what is called instructional control. So those are some of the reasons. Obviously, you can talk to Dr. Arisola. She could give you more details, but pretty much everything that's been said to you is true. But keep in mind, we do have children within our boundaries that some of them have very severe disabilities, and it's beyond what our teaching staff can provide.
I understand all that, and thank you very much. I just want to learn more about how you determine it and who determines it. That's a lot of money. Okay?
It is.
You know, that's, I'll talk to Dr. Aristotle.
So, yes.
Thank you.
And there are state regulations as well with certain things we have to provide.
Well, I'm sure it's complicated. It's part of the state. It's got to be
It's
complicated.
actually, I believe, something that's in discussion now as far as changing state law in regards to special ed. Okay, any other questions, comments? Secretary, please call the roll.
Mr. Anderson?
Aye.
Mr. Brown?
Aye.
Mr. Heisel?
Aye.
Mr. Teray?
Aye.
Secretary's aye. Dr. Hall?
Aye. Thank you. Lastly, the feasibility study proposal. Can I have a motion to approve the feasibility study proposal presented by Healy, Bender and Associates?
So move.
Moved by Mr. Brown.
Second.
Second by Mr. Anderson. Mr. Bruce.
Healy Bender presented the feasibility study process to the board on September 11th, and the board asked Healy Bender to submit a written proposal with 1 week. They complied with that, and they have submitted the attached proposal that's on board book. Essentially, the feasibility study, as they presented, will provide a detailed educational adequacy, which is another term for feasibility study analysis on the district's buildings. The data obtained in the life safety survey and the facility study will be assessed, will be prioritized, and then a district-wide master plan would be developed to guide the board through future capital decisions. And then this feasibility study takes into account all board, staff, and community input and assesses the architectural and engineering aspects of the projects. And then it will generate multiple options for the board to consider, and based on extensive input from the district, it results in basically a capital plan for the district. So attached is the proposal. The cost of this study is $33,500 plus reimbursable expenses for printed reports, etc. And then also an important supplement to this information is I handed out a printed copy of a timeline, a proposed timeline, in terms of certain dates that we would have to kind of use as a guideline if we wanted to meet our estimated deadline of December 31st is when we wanted to have our final capital plan finalized. And in order to do that, like for example, on October 2nd, Healy Bender proposes that we have our first planning meeting with the planning committee. So between now and then, we would have to form our planning committee, assign people to the committee, and start our meetings going. Obviously, if the board needed to or wanted to take a little bit longer, we can do that. If we want to meet our deadline of December 31st, Healy Bender could certainly do that, but they've laid out for us kind of the timeline the different milestones we have to meet in order to stay on track. Otherwise, we could fall behind very quickly. Based on the information that we received in our presentation from the 11th, the recommendation is to approve the proposal submitted by Healy Bender to have the feasibility study completed.
Thank you, Mr. Gruce. Any comments or questions?
Yes, Madam President. Are we to now appoint or plan the team? Are we to do that now? As far as the first step one, it says district planning committee. Are we to set a planning committee now?
I believe that'll be a discussion in the business committee, the finance committee meeting, further discuss how we would go about creating the team.
We could
I would
definitely
assume
do that.
that would be on the agenda.
I know that, well, the next finance committee is on October 9th, so by the 9th, we would already be well into some of the different actions that need to take place. So we could delay the start of it by a little bit, that just knowing that if we do that, then the final product might not be available until maybe the middle of January instead of January 1st.
There again, it's critical, very critical that we do adhere to this schedule, because if not, there's going to be some other things that
It could
we
be
are
other
not
delays.
going to be able to take advantage of. So, I mean, this is a very aggressive schedule, and I said, I heard that from the board, that, you know what, we got to stop playing around and procrastinating, so on and so forth. So this is a very, very aggressive schedule to make things happen so we can move forward. Again, this is the perfect storm that happened in this district with the life safety issues and all the other things that's transpiring. So, picking the planning committee and other committees like that, I don't know exactly how we're going to do it. Do we need to come together as a board, or is this, do we need board members on it? I don't know.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we don't know.
So I just
So,
like
but
to go on a record, Madam President, to say I volunteer myself as one of the board members.
we know one thing: we can't have three.
I volunteer as well. There's your two. In all fairness, though, we're asking for key administrators, including building principals, key district faculty. I don't see us creating a team this week, because you may get people that just have to get back to you and let you know. And again, in all fairness, this was just presented to us tonight. So I would target, we have a policy meeting next week on the 2nd. We also have, is there something else? Oh, we have the planning meeting. The policy is Wednesday? Wednesday? Can we shoot for Wednesday to at least have that? Because even getting the team together doesn't mean that we can't move forward with the other things, correct?
No, and I think at least, again, we do not want to shortcut the process.
No.
We want it as effective as possible within a time frame. But again, it is very aggressive, and if we do not meet that December 31st time frame, there's ramifications involved. So on, potentially without exposing things right now, potentially not being able to capture some other things that we need to do.
I will work with Dr. Rogers. We'll work on that aspect as far as getting the team together, because we know time is of the essence. But like I said, in the meantime, I don't think that should delay anything else on the timeline.
Okay. And Dr. Hall, just as a resource, since we have established Express Your Voice, people have expressed interest in the surveys to have input. It would be nice to include those individuals who took the time out to partake in the surveys.
Absolutely.
So we can start there.
I do have a question regarding the costs. You're talking about $33.5K, $33,500, plus reimbursements, expenses for printed reports, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think we need some type of finite number right there. That's all. I don't want that et cetera going higher than X amount of dollars.
The et cetera part might have been me just summarizing, but let me quickly just see exactly how it was worded. It says, plus reimbursable expenses including 3 bound copies and an electronic copy of the master plan. So in their actual proposal, it's more defined. So essentially what they're saying is that at the end of this, they're going to have to print off 3 bound copies and then produce an electronic copy of the plan. So whatever that costs to do, we would reimburse for whatever that production cost was. I don't think it'll be significant, but Scott, do you know
Roughly.
typically just a rough estimate of what that would cost to print the final 3 reports and do an electronic copy of it?
Yes, usually it's just a matter of about $1,500.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. For the record.
My question
No, 'cause he's
was
saying
also
roughly.
pertaining to that. So we say reimbursable expenses. Is that the only expense? Because it's listed 3 bound copies and an electric copy, and that's all that's listed. So that would be the extent of reimbursables. Okay, thank you.
And so, Scott, so your firm has committed to this time frame.
We've actually already began.
Okay. So is this something being accepted by the board tonight or not accepted? But if it was to be accepted, is it in contractual form? Do we sign it? So what are the ramifications if you do not meet this time frame?
Well, we're committed to meet the time frame. It would be, as the process moves along, you will know, you'll have 2 board members as part of that process. If things are lagging behind, it's usually not getting answers from members of the committee, or if something runs longer with a community forum or something of that nature, we can easily meet this requirement. As long as things can keep moving forward, there's no problem with us making this deadline.
Okay.
And it is a contract that we will sign, and it does indicate in the contract that the Board of Education, excuse me, deadline is December 31st.
Okay.
Key being, though, that that would be contingent on they also providing
that.
If we're not able to keep up with this schedule, then the understanding that it was our own choice to kind of fall behind on it, but because it does kind of stack up in terms of a chronological order of these certain things that need to get done in a certain order.
Okay.
But Helium Bender and Associates is saying tonight this is doable.
Yes.
If we do
Yes.
everything on our end, this
Correct.
is doable.
Yes.
And if we don't do everything on our end, is there any additional expenses?
And again, I believe this is the first time the district has conducted such a study, or with the assistance of an outside entity. So there are going to be some lessons learned. Everything is not etched in stone on our part. So if we don't have all of our I's dotted and T's crossed, I don't think those should be showstoppers. So we just have to just move forward.
And nobody's operating in a vacuum, so
Right, right.
we'll know, as it moves forward.
So if you're asking for something on our part and we can't quite deliver, but you could get that same answer on your side, please do so.
Absolutely.
With our,
Make it happen.
with our
Okay.
guidance.
Also, I'm looking at some of the proposed dates for the forum, so we would need to run those through our calendar.
Sure.
Okay. Okay, any final thoughts or questions?
So we're going to come up with this plan. At the end of all of this, this is going to be the master plan that we're going to adopt as Board of Education. Whatever this community forum comes up with and these recommendations.
If it's
Are you telling me that?
if it fits our needs, yeah. If we like the recommendation, just because the recommendations come doesn't mean that we have to adopt it, and it's going to be the board's. it's going to be the board's decision to say, you know what, we like or we don't like what we see.
So you're going to give us your recommended option at the end?
From a professional entity, yes.
Because, you know, we got 80-year-old schools and we got 50-year-old schools. I mean, it don't cost $35K to say that we need to replace them.
Let's not go there, Mike, at this point, because it's more than just schools. That's what the feasibility is. It's not just a school that's in disarray or not. It's the whole gamut of things, the impact on education, so on, the impact on the community, and so on. So it's just not a go, no-go. I think that's how we responded earlier with the board and a few people, and that's, you know, we're talking about millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars. So it behooves us to do our due diligence to make sure we got the right things answered, right questions answered, and moving forward.
And what I do a lot like about this process is that it's involving our public in the process. After all, whatever decision we make will greatly affect our public and our students, so getting their input is very important.
Very important. We agree.
As well as getting a thorough assessment of the needs of our district. All right, Secretary, please call the roll.
Mr. Anderson?
Aye.
Mr. Anderson?
Aye.
Mr. Brown?
Aye.
Mr. Heisel?
Aye.
Mr. Toure?
No.
Secretary's aye. Dr. Hall?
Aye. Okay, motion carries. Can I have a motion to go into closed session?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Anderson,
Second.
second by Mr. Brown. Secretary, please call the roll.
Mr. Toure?
Aye.
Mr. Heisel?
Aye.
Mr. Brown?
Aye.
Mr. Anderson?
Aye.
Secretary's aye. Dr. Hall?
Aye, we're going into closed session for the purpose of discussing personnel and litigation, potential litigation, and teacher negotiation. Okay, we are now in closed session.
The first part, they want to be by themselves. Okay. Yeah. Including me. I'm even excluded. You're out. Yeah. Oh, you get some Cheetos. Yeah, go get your Cheetos. Yeah. knew it. I meant to catch you. It's mine.
Although I did see in the tour company we used, they're offering a tour of Vietnam and Cambodia. Wow. Through many of the areas where I was. I'm not going. What a surprise.
Okay. We do need to complete our board meeting. Can I have a motion to come out of closed session?
So moved?
Moved by Mr.
Second.
Anderson, second by Mr. Heisel. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, we're out of closed. Is there any old business? Any new business?
Oh, new business, yes. I got a letter from, or an email from Representative DeLuca about the ROTC program, and he said he would be more than happy to endorse anything that the board came up with to help expedite the process. And I think we should contact also Senator Hutchinson, and ultimately it'll go to Representative U.S. Congresswoman
Robin Kelly.
Robin Kelly. So I'd just like to talk about expediting a letter, whoever wants to draft it up, maybe Laura, about, you know, that we're really not particular if we get Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps, Coast Guard, whatever, just to get the ROTC program moving and get these political endorsements. Can we, how do we do this?
Mr. Teray, I have reached out to State Representative DeLuca just to get clarification on exactly what he wants the letter to entail, because I think it's a specific way he was requesting for the letter to be.
Okay.
So when I get the information, Laura, I will forward it to you, and we can go from there.
Great, thank you.
Okay, any other new business?
So that was new business. And just moving forward, I'm not sure how to go about the process, but I think we need to somehow prioritize additional programs that the district lost a few years back, and maybe just prioritize how to, you know, money contingent on funds, bringing those programs back. So I would like to see something to that effect, saying that, you know, we lost PE gyms for the primary grades, we lost this, we lost that. Teachers may want to see this come first, so on and so forth. So just have a plan to bring those programs back as well.
I would charge the Education Committee with that task of exploring the return of those. I think we did. They were on the survey, correct? The particular classes that we were looking into. But
I
at least
think those classes were for high school only.
Okay,
I
but
believe.
you're saying adding art, music, and PE as well. So doing a assessment of how much it would cost. Is that what you're saying?
I think we would do well, too. I saw a lot of the surveys that came in, and people we talked to, like at Balmoral, specifically stated that those are some of the things. So it's good to be able to utilize that information from their own verbiage.
It's definitely still a hot topic. I myself went to Balmoral's curriculum night and walked into a classroom that the parent was actually really aggressive in questioning the teacher about this issue, and of course they saw me standing there. Well, you know, we have the board president right here. You could ask her directly. So it is something that, you know, people are still talking about. So at least we can revisit those and, you know, determine or create at least an outlook on what implementing those back into the schools would look like. Okay. All right, any other new business? Okay, can I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Teray,
Second?
second by Mr. Anderson. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, we are officially adjourned.